Hello, I'm Keith Spera from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Welcome to Let's Talk. My guest today is an actor and author who also happens to be one of the country's most successful stand-up comedians. His many endeavors include hundreds of commercials, dozens of film and TV roles, 11 comedy specials, 2 books, and 5 children. On February 20th, 2025, he and Sebastian Maniscalco will co-headline a night of comedy at the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans. Here to talk about all that and more is Jim Gaffigan. Jim, welcome to Let's Talk.
Well, thanks for having me, Keith. Appreciate it.
So I feel like the first thing we should talk about, we are taping this on the morning after the Super Bowl. Has your football withdrawal kicked in yet?
It'll probably feel more in effect next Sunday, but yeah, there is a certain sadness. There's a mourning of the ending of the NFL season. Not everyone can live in New Orleans. I feel like there's never a boring day in New Orleans. I live in New York, but I like the Sundays. I like the football.
Yeah, it is. It definitely provides a structure for the day, and it feels like something is wrong when there's not a game on Sunday in the background. So it feels like something is wrong. I saw your recent CBS Morning commentary on that, and it definitely sounded like you were going to be dealing with a little bit of withdrawal here going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun doing those CBS Sunday commentaries because there really is no assignment surrounding each of them. Some of it I'll just get an idea that I'll want to just kind of get out there that won't be kind of stand-up focused, and then sometimes the executive producer will be like, what do you got on the Super Bowl? And I'll just kind of panic and I'll be like, well, I'm always sad when the NFL season's over. And so it's as a creative person, it's nice to have some assignments here and there.
Absolutely. And panic can be a good motivator as well.
Absolutely.
So what have you accomplished so far this morning? Did you take your kids to school? Are you still in that routine?
I did wake my kids up, which was not great. The day after the Super Bowl is not a great, it's not their proudest moments. And then I had a couple of pieces of toast. I tried to listen to some stand-up, but when I'm home, I get my kids up and get them out the door, and then the nap is lingering, and then I mostly when I travel, that's when I can get some rest.
Right, when you're out working, you can get some rest then. I understand.
Yeah.
Yes, as a parent myself, I totally understand. Well, your oldest is 20 now, is that right?
20, yeah.
So as they've gotten older, have they had more opinions about what you say about them in your comedy routines?
I would say no. Some of it is probably they're just not interested, but some of it is because I have 5 children. It's hard to identify who exactly I'm talking about if I have a specific joke where I'm complaining about my children, but they probably should get a cut of, because they provide so much material at this point. But no, it's interesting because I get that question a lot lately, and I'm sure they will probably articulate some frustration with it, but they would much rather me talk generically about my children in my stand-up than post an image of them on social media. Like that's a no-no.
Gotcha. So you don't do that at all. That's verboten.
I mean, it'll come up. My wife will post a photo from Easter or something like that. But I kind of know better. It's just kind of me being dumb. Like my son has opened for me a couple times, and I might post a photo of him doing stand-up, and he's like, take that down. So.
When you look at the balance sheet, the kids provide a lot of material, which of course provides income, but they also cost a lot. Do you think you will end up having kind of a net profit on your kids when all is said and done?
Oh, absolutely not. No, they're this, I kind of think that, parenting is not a great investment, financially, emotionally, but probably most significantly physically. Like people that, like the parents of teenagers do kind of resemble somebody who just stepped away from a car accident. So it's the cost on parents is pretty significant.
Yeah. My wife and I also oftentimes think, did we ever once have a conversation where we said, you know what, we have too much free time and too much money and not enough stress in our lives. Let's have some kids. Like,
yeah, it's no joke.
Yeah, I don't remember that conversation at all. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is comedian Jim Gaffigan. Excuse me. So Jim, you're doing a show down here in New Orleans with Sebastian Maniscalco. Do you feel like your audiences mesh? Do you feel like his style of comedy and the people he brings in kind of meshes with yours?
I mean, we're both Italian Americans. No, I would say, yeah. I mean, we did a show at the Hollywood Bowl with Jerry Seinfeld and Nate Bargatze, and it was great. And this was kind of something that just came up out of nowhere, really. I mean, and I love Sebastian. He's a good guy and a great comedian. So I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to go to New Orleans. You know what I mean? I'm not a fool, but and I also, I think it's great that we're doing these shows together because, what I understand about New Orleans is, like, New Orleans doesn't need any entertainment. It's like the food, the music, the nightlife, like you don't need a comedy show. So like if you can have two decent comedians on a comedy bill, that might lure someone to the venue. It's interesting because there's certain places like Nashville, obviously a great city filled with a lot of art, but it's easier to, maybe it's the country music thing of, all these writers and musicians need a break. But in New Orleans, it does feel a little weird to even do shows there because New Orleans doesn't need entertainment,
Yeah, and New Orleans is kind of a, its own daily comedy,
Yeah.
I mean, what's the Mardi Gras masks? It's the tragedy and the comedy all rolled into one all the time, it seems like. Well, yeah, I mean, you and Sebastian, I mean, you guys, do y'all sit around and talk about being Catholic? Is that something that you discuss backstage?
Well, I mean, comedians will, have innumerable types of conversations. And the conversations I've had with Sebastian are, they vary a lot, but like the whole Catholic thing is, that's like an aspect, but being a comedian in this weird occupation is much more of a common thread, I would say. I mean, we're both Midwestern, we're both from the Chicagoland area, but, some of it is as comedians stylistically and just kind of managing your career. That's some of the stuff that I find interesting and what you think is funny and kind of navigating. I mean, Sebastian and I are also, I think artistically, we're both kind of victims. Like our point of view is that we are subjected to, what life has dealt us. Like, I think people enjoy the outlet that we provide in our outrage at this human existence.
Right, and in your case, self-deprecation, obviously a huge part of it as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You've done a number of shows with Jerry Seinfeld, and I think you guys often fly in his private jet. Do you get frequent flyer miles when you travel in his jet?
No, he doesn't. Not that I know. I don't think he owns a jet, but I mean, that's what is, those Jerry shows are very special because, and I'm sure these Sebastian ones will be too, because as you get more successful in stand-up, you end up being more isolated. You really kind of come up with a crew of comedians, I mean, I started in New York, but there are plenty of great New Orleans comedians that, start in New Orleans and then they might go to New York or LA. And as you kind of work your way up, you end up not seeing some of these great people or not kind of enjoying the benefits of your peer group. So those Jerry shows are just amazing because we completely nerd out on the process of writing and just different philosophies. He's very much kind of I kind of think of him as kind of like a comedy Aristotle. Like, there's the absolutes that Jerry kind of adheres to that he has, 50 years to back up, which is really interesting.
Well, yeah, and I mean, he was one of the guys that inspired and influenced you early on too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is comedian Jim Gaffigan. You developed a pretty cool sideline during the presidential race of playing Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz on Saturday Night Live. Do you miss that? Do you miss being Tim Walz?
It was a great time. It was really interesting, but there is, and I love acting, but not, I think comedians are very spoiled because when you go on stage, you are a writer, director, and performer, and so I loved portraying him, but it was also just in the cold opening. It would just be for like 2 minutes. It kind of messed up my tour, but I mean, I relish the opportunity. It was, so yeah, so I miss it, because some of those, the experience of Saturday Night Live is so unique.
Yeah. It's
kind of like, you feel like you've been accepted to an Ivy League of comedy in a way. And just the bizarre after party, these after parties, they start at 1, and then, I remember texting my wife, I'm like, I'm gonna go to the after party, say hi, and I got to the after party at like 1, and I was the first one there. And so the party's really, and then when you leave at 3, you're like the first one leaving. And that's independent of just the cast of characters that are just wandering around these SNL parties. So it's fun in a small dose, it's, it also is, I mean, as a comedian, I have a very strange schedule, but like, there's people that do SNL for years. I mean, I'm not sure how you, I guess if you're in your 20s, it doesn't faze you. You know what I mean? But like going to bed at 6 a.m. just seems like a bad idea.
I hear you. If you're just tuning in, my guest today is comic Jim Gaffigan. Yeah, and playing Tim Walz, I mean, you don't typically do a lot of political material in your stand-up routine, but that kind of enabled you to touch on it a little bit, but it was more an impersonation than political humor, I guess.
Yeah. No, the portraying him, it was really interesting because in the end, I'm a Midwestern guy, and so is Governor Walz, and I really ended up just kind of doing an impression of my brother Mitch, who is similar to Governor Walz, a very well-intended, overly sincere, sweet guy. And so, but the political angle is interesting because there's part of me that feels as though you don't want to avoid it, but you also know that the reason why people are coming to a show is to laugh. You know what I mean? So like, you can have strong opinions. You need to retain your authenticity. I don't want to appear like I'm being insincere, but I also don't want to take myself too seriously. Like, nobody needs to know, particularly in this day and age. It's like, enough already. You know what I mean? It's like, can we just get back to work? You know?
Exactly. We talked earlier about you looking forward to come back to New Orleans. I'm surprised you were not scarred by filming Troop Zero down here a few years ago during what was a brutally hot summer. My eldest daughter was actually an extra on that film, and one of her friends, I think, got heat stroke out there on the set. It was apparently quite the struggle with the heat out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was May. It was May and part of June, and there is, I mean, it's just, there's a price for living in a city like New Orleans, right? You're like, granted, it's beautiful now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's much nicer than, New York, it's freezing. But yeah, those summer months in New Orleans are just unbelievable. And so yeah, when we're shooting Troop Zero, it was, there's a certain amount of like, what are people doing down here? You know what I mean? Like, what is going, like, why are we outside? Well, I don't think we're supposed to be outside.
Right. Right. Makes you wonder why humans first settled in that part of the country in the first place. Yeah. Well, playing roles like that, I mean, that was not it had comedic elements to it, but it was also a dramatic role, and you've done some hardcore dramatic roles as well. Is that just scratching a different kind of itch for you? And obviously, you've studied acting, you did all that, but I mean, it seems like at this point, when your career as a comedian is so far advanced that would be the focus, but you still like doing these roles in movies.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love acting. It's something I really enjoy, but it's just the opportunities. I always kind of described auditioning for an acting role like stripping, except for you don't get $1, and the process of getting the roles is something that I find very confusing, and it takes a certain skill set to get on top of that. The business is always kind of moving, and if you're right for the role, you're right for the role. But so I love acting, and I love doing, portraying complex characters. I have a lot of voices in my head, so I love kind of engaging that. But I'm so grateful that I'm not reliant solely on that, because when I think of, if I tried to live off just emotionally, forget about the monetary standpoint, emotionally, on just the acting roles I get, I would be in an insane asylum, because it's just so difficult, and obtaining creative fulfillment is really important for a creative person.
Well, and I mean, to be an actor is to accept a whole lot of rejection. So, I mean, you've got to be prepared for that, is to be rejected a whole lot before you get roles. So,
yeah.
Your two books, Dad is Fat and Food, A Love Story. Your latest TV special is called The Skinny. So obviously there's a progression there, a shifting paradigm, I guess, from where you were then to where you are now.
Yeah. No, well, that's what's so fun about doing specials, is you kind of chronicle each mini chapter of your life, right? So my first special, I had one kid. My first comedy album, I wasn't even married, and now I've gone through this evolution of being food obsessed to by the way, to be in full disclosure, it's not like I've achieved anything myself. I'm just taking a shot that is an appetite suppressant. So it's not, it's a little bit like giving supermodels credit for their looks. It's like I had nothing to do with it. Right. And so, but yeah, so like the kind of this chapter of having lost weight was really fun to embrace for the special that's on Hulu, The Skinny. But there's always different things to kind of dive into, like for me, I have really gotten into bourbon, and of course Sazerac is New Orleans, so anyone from the Gold Ring family is welcome to come to my show, and they can sit on stage if they'd like. So it's like, as I've gotten into bourbon, it's kind of influenced, I'm trying to write a bunch of material about it, but I'm also it's just, that's what's so great about stand-up, is you write about what you're passionate about, whether it's positive or negative.
Right, whether it's food or bourbon.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So, are you a disciplined writer when it comes to coming up with new material? Obviously you write a lot with your wife, but is this something where you block out time specifically to write, or are you more of a guy that something pops into your head and that's when you write?
It's really all over the place, but I would say that I have really gotten to the point where when I travel, that being said, it's probably not going to be the case in New Orleans, but when I travel, I will really spend the day writing and organizing, because a lot of it, as you know, is rewriting. It's not just the initial idea. It's kind of sitting and having the patience to sit there and go, all right, this thing's not moving, but then you move on to something else and you get an idea for that previous thing. So, but for me, the writing is, some of it is rewriting, but some of it is, it will be thinking of an idea and popping on stage. The last time I was in New Orleans, I had it was, I think, after St. Patrick's Day, and it was just like the insight that like St. Patrick's Day and New Orleans are kind of these similar things where you kind of embrace this, more specifically on Bourbon Street, like it's okay to be out of control drunk, like, whereas in any other situation people would be like, that person needs help. But if you're wasted and loud on Bourbon Street, that's appropriate, and that's also appropriate on St. Patrick's Day. So it's like coming up with those ideas and trying them on stage, and that usually works for an appreciation or affection you have for unique things in that community. Like, I love the fact that New Orleans, a lot of New Orleans has kind of a, it seems as though someone's been like, yeah, I'll get to that later. Like there's like, the sidewalk is not finished. Yeah, we're gonna get to that later. There's a parade over here, so we're gonna go to that for now. And people from New Orleans, or people that love New Orleans, will appreciate that, because obviously it's done from affection, but it also hits maybe a truth.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I wrote an article for the Super Bowl talking about how New Orleans preparing for the Super Bowl was like a citywide house cleaning at the last minute before company comes over. It's like, oh, wait, everyone's coming, we got to clean up. So.
And New Orleans, and you'd think that New Orleans of any city would be the best at this, because it is this host city. It's like New Orleans and Vegas are really where people have that. Because I do a lot of private events, and private events are in Vegas, they're in Hawaii, and they're in New Orleans.
Exactly. Just a couple minutes left here. And again, you should mention your wife. You do write a whole lot with her, and she is a key part of the operation at this point, yes?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, the relationship of our writing has evolved and changed. Like when I was first, like writing the books, I could never have done the books without my wife. But like the impact of her on the writing today is different from like 6 years ago or even 10 years ago. Obviously, after she, had a brain tumor, I would run ideas by her, but like we've got, 5 kids aged 12 to 20, so I can't really corner her and say, all right, here, can you help me come up with some bourbon jokes? But her editorial skills are obviously, a very valuable asset. So it's ever changing. It's like, I kind of think of it as like someone's relationship with their faith. It's like I'm Catholic, but I'm not as Catholic as I was 10 years ago, but I'm still Catholic. But my wife is definitely my writing partner. It's like, when we wrote Food a Love Story, it's like in some ways, I would write down notes and she would turn them into paragraphs. So it's like, but it changes. And, if I'm sitting in Durham for 5 days, it's kind of hard for me to, hey, let's get on a Zoom and write together when she's got some crazy teenagers at home.
I get it. Well, Jim, I hope you're able to be productive at least a little bit when you're here in New Orleans, and we look forward to seeing you down here with Sebastian real soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. I'm Keith Spera. We'll see you next time on Let's Talk.